and both of them benefited, I think, from his support immensely. I mean, Gordon in particular, and Neil used to often think of Gordon as his possible successor, because Gordon was, as everybody knows now, was kind of seen as the senior of the two.
Well, I think there's lots of politicians who've been tipped as future leaders, and I think it probably is a dangerous thing because you immediately become a target. But, I mean, that's part of politics. It thrives on talking about personalities when it ought to be spending more time, or the writing of it and the reporting of it should probably spend more time looking at the policy issues and the, if you like, the debate within parties and between parties about the important policies.
By 1991, Neil Kinnock's policy review had been completed, and Labour once again launched itself as a modernised party, ready for power. The party had now rejected many of the policies once regarded as fundamental to Labour. Gone was the commitment to unilateral nuclear disarmament, once Kinnock's most sincerely held belief. Out went wholehearted support for public ownership and union rights. To the left, Margaret Thatcher was the inspiration.
The policy review was designed to bring us into line with the main tenets of government policy, and then somehow to present ourselves as better able to administer policies that were really dictated by the thinking of the Prime Minister. And that was one reason why it wasn't very credible to the electorate.
Privatisation had gone to such an extent that we simply could not afford to buy back the public utilities. International politics were changing. There was a new middle class which wanted something different in terms of housing and in terms of pensions and social security. But it wasn't an ideological change brought about by Mrs. Thatcher. It was a change in the world which needed democratic socialism to be applied in a different fashion.
But Neil Kinnock's change of heart, especially on nuclear weapons, was widely regarded as a sign of political immaturity.
I think that the mistake was that this was a change too far, that people's feeling, heavily presented by the Conservative Party, reinforced by the right-wing media, who you have to remember at this time were universally anti-Kinnock, who were vehemently having a go at him personally, that they were able to use this as an indication, A, that he would change his mind even on the most crucial thing that he'd presented himself as being solidly behind, and secondly, that therefore you couldn't trust the party.
I've put in a call for Charles.
Neil Kinnock's advisers now attempted to control the leader's image. His natural, but sometimes embarrassing, ebullience was curbed. At carefully staged photo opportunities, he was dressed in black suits with white shirts and a regimental tie.
I think that Neil Kinnock and those around him thought Neil had to be like Mrs. Thatcher in order to be the Prime Minister of Britain. And I think they squashed him into suits that didn't suit him, you know, chopped off his long hair, tidied him up, made him paler, changed him to be as big as her. And I think there was an error in it. Because, of course, by the time she went, the whole country heaved an enormous sigh of relief that Major was so not like her and was so much like an ordinary bloke with a big smile. They might regret it now, but they wanted something different, not another version of her.
The arrival of John Major in Downing Street, a man who made a virtue of his modest background, wrong-footed Labour. It led inevitably to renewed agitation among the old guard for Neil Kinnock's replacement by John Smith.
Some people allege that John Smith had a game plan to replace Neil as leader of the party. That was put to me by a lot of people. I, in fact, discussed it with John at one point over this period. I believed that was entirely untrue. However, I have to say that after the election, after the 92 election, one or two people in very senior positions indicated to me that John had been talking in a disloyal way in ways that I tended to discount.
Behind the friendly smiles in public, a gulf had opened up between John Smith, the Shadow Chancellor, and Neil Kinnock. Smith believed that Labour's tax plan should be kept secret to the last minute. Kinnock wanted them thrashed out in public.
As far as the taxation issues, there was a difference of approach between Neil and John Smith, the Shadow Chancellor, and his team. I remember a member of the Shadow Cabinet urging me to have a simple 10-point question and answer what our taxation policy should be. And we drafted it because John Smith wouldn't draft it. And I showed him the draft over Christmas 91, New Year 92, and we went to a Shadow Cabinet meeting in a hotel in Kensington in early 92. And I said, look, we really are keen that there should be clarity on these issues. Neil's very keen that there should be clarity on these issues. But John felt it was better to not to be clear on those issues. And there was a lot of difficulties and tensions on these matters.
Eventually, 5 days after the general election was called, on the 16th of March 1992, John Smith presented his shadow budget to the public in a ceremony designed to mimic the real thing.
Huge confidence was reposed in John's image as the trustworthy bank manager. The people who ran the campaign in 1992 genuinely believed, I think, that if they could only wheel John out often enough, they could deal with all of this. Our much maligned posters warned us throughout that we were on very shaky ground, and that if once the Tories got their act together on tax, we would be defeated.
If there was any disparity, I wouldn't even say disagreement, in the view that I had and some others had, it was based on that I thought it was a long slog, that I thought it was a week by week, month by month, year by year affair. And others thought that you could afford to have the fireworks just before, even during the election campaign. I think history tends to be on my side.
The conduct of Labour's campaign for the 1992 general election reflected the divisions and tensions within the party.
That's fine. You just nail it in there, then it's picture framed by the white surround.
In the absence of Peter Mandelson, who was himself running for Parliament, the Labour campaign lacked overall control.
I think it's fair to say that we came close to management meltdown as far as our client was concerned. What I mean by management meltdown is that there was no clear command structure, no one at the top of that command structure who was clearly in control, no clear lines of authority and responsibility emitting from that command structure or the person who was at the top of that command structure. And the politicians were getting very unhappy with the whole thing as well.
The difficulties came to a head when Labour's communications agency produced and broadcast a video which became known as Jennifer's Ear. The video looked at the differences between private and public health care. But a row broke out when questions were asked about the identity of the people behind the stories.
This was a clear example where presentation had got to the point that it was no longer under political control, and where a whole broadcast had been prepared without the participation or the knowledge of the spokesperson involved. I firmly believe that it is important that, yes, we use communication experts, yes, we use the skills of people who can put across our message more effectively than we can, but we have to remain in control of the message.
The triumph of the medium over the message reached its zenith in Sheffield a week before polling.
The brief was simple, that we should have the biggest political rally since the war. And we did, therefore, from the beginning, look at big venues and that it was going to be a big event. There was no question of it. We decided very early on that we would give a three-line whip to all the Shadow Cabinet to be present, and I asked for a budget of £150,000 and was given it.
And now it's time for us to move outside the arena.
Neil Kinnock arrived in a helicopter, which we saw on the big screen, and we saw him get out and walk across and get into his car. And then the screen showed a sequence of the campaign so far, which gave him chance to drive round this huge arena.
Here, inside the Sheffield Arena, Neil and Glenys Kinnock.
He made then a grand entrance from the side, of the arena. He then made a relatively short